Now listen, we'll only tolerate so much of this talking, having been on the other end of it for many years.
You're going to say it's your own time you're wasting in it.
We're live chat.
That's it. Okay, good. Thank you very much. We're going to begin our special meeting, Performance and Overview Scrutiny. And it's a special meeting. It wasn't one set in the calendar. And we will start the meeting now. It's Tuesday, the 3rd of December at 10 a.m. And welcome to anybody who might be watching either live or in the future online. You're very welcome. And we're going to be dealing with some interesting and very important reports this morning. At the request of officers who have got competing challenges on their time, we're going to flip around item number 3 and item number 4 on the agenda. And we're going to start with the risk register in the reports and move on to the financial update, and then on to the secondary schools leadership funding. So we're delighted to see we've got cabinet members present as well as officers present to be able to deal with those reports and also to be able to respond to questions that we and points that we may have to raise. So we'll start with apologies for absence. And Robert, have we received any?
We have none received, Chair, but we do have Councillor Powell here, who's potentially substituting for
Councillor Webb is struggling to make it. She may join us, and we're very grateful. Councillor Powell is substituting for her, and if Councillor Webb joins, that would be great. And at that point, I think Councillor Powell, you'd be ready to step down from the point of view of being actually a substitute on the committee if Councillor Webb does join. Thank you. We're moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any? I'm not aware, I can't see any being made. We don't have minutes on this meeting because it's a special meeting, and we move straight into the reports. And as I mentioned, we're going to flip around the first 2 reports, and therefore starting with the risk register update. And grateful to see colleagues with us this morning. I'm looking around to see who wants to go first. Councillor Callard, did you want to kick us off on the risk register update? Yeah, brilliant. Could I just mention, as much as anything for anybody who might be looking, the reason we're having an update on the risk register, having looked at it just a couple of months ago, is because we raised particular interest and concerns around areas of adult social care, children's services, and the wider situation in terms of the finances for the council. And if we could home in on those areas, that would be particularly helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I'm presenting this report to Scrutiny today to provide members with an overview of the current strategic risks facing the authority. The strategic risk assessment ensures that strategic risks are identified and monitored by the authority, that risk controls are appropriate and proportionate, and that senior managers and elected members systematically review the strategic risks facing the authority. Appendix 1 provides the latest strategic risk register for the Council. The format of the strategic risk register has been updated to assess risk in line with the updated policy, included applying risk appetite levels. The strategic risk assessment is a detailed document. Any significant changes or updates made to each risk can be found in the key changes column in the summary table at the start of the full strategic risk register. The Council continues to operate in a dynamic environment and has controls in place to assess, manage and mitigate, as far as possible, a variety of risks. The Strategic Risk Register is a live document and is continually updated based on the latest evidence. This will include adjusting the focus, detail and risk levels of risks where necessary. Some of the significant progress made with the mitigation measures for the risks in the last 6 months includes the development of a medium-term financial strategy, which sets key principles to guide medium-term financial planning and provide the link between the Council's long-term policy objectives and its financial capacity, which is identified as risk 2. As the committee will be aware from the earlier report, significant financial risk remains in year and the medium term for which mitigating actions are being implemented. Next, the development of a people strategy that contains activity aimed at mitigating risks to recruitment and retention, which is risk 4. There is immediate pressure faced within workforce planning. The measures put in place by the people strategy are assessed to support the reduction in the risk in the medium term. The development of strategies to provide the provision to meet social care needs for children requiring support in specific placements and adults who require care at home, identified as risk 7 and risk 8, supporting mitigation for the risks. There are continuing challenges in responding to the complexity of demand for social care support. Implementing a range of approaches and support to improve attendance in schools and reduce exclusions. As part of mitigating school attendance and behaviours that challenge in schools which have been assessed as high risks and are risks 9A and B. The development of a replacement local development plan that full council endorsed for detailed public consultation in October 2024. This forms part of the mitigation for some risks, including risk 11, climate, and risk 13, housing. The risk of delays in adopting the plan is identified in risk 10. The development of a climate and nature emergency strategy, underpinned by 4 action plans, the delivery of which are an important part of the mitigation of risk 11, climate. The risk on the delivery of public bus services, previously risk 14, has been de-escalated from the strategic risk register. It is no longer a significant risk to the whole organisation. The risk will be monitored closely within the relevant directorate risk register and may escalate to the strategic risk register in future if needed. Following consideration of the risk register by the committee in May 2024, the committee has identified specific strategic risks it would like to seek assurance on the mitigating actions in place to manage the risk. These are risk 2 related to the council's finances, risk 7 and risk 8 related to meeting the demand and complexity of cases in children's and adult social care, respectively. The latest update on these risks is contained in the register in Appendix 1. Strategic risks covered by the assessment are typically risks which could significantly jeopardise the Council's ability to achieve its objectives, statutory plans and/or provide operational services as planned. The risk assessment also only covers high and medium level strategic risks. Lower level or operational risks are not registered unless they are projected to escalate within the 3 years covered. The strategic risk assessment should continue to focus on medium-term risks to service delivery. The strategic risk register will regularly evolve and adapt in line with this. The up-to-date register is accessible on the Council's intranet, so members are able to utilise it at any point in the year to reprioritise their work plans as appropriate. And I'd like to thank Richard and also Hannah for their work in this area. Richard's joining us today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and just for anybody who's watching, to make sure you are aware, Councillor Callard is the cabinet member for this area, and so it's really good that you're here. Thank you very much. We also have Richard Jones and Matthew Gatehouse. I don't know whether officers of the council who may want to say something before we open it for questions and comments. I don't know if either Richard or Matt.
I think Councillor Cannard's covered all the key points there, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to open it to committee members to any questions that you may have. I see Councillor Bond's hand up.
Good morning. Councillor Bond, representing people, residents in West End in Caldecott. Sorry, excuse me. Really, there's a lot of hard work, this, and very thorough, and understanding your statement that they're all high, because 14 out of 16 of those items are 12 or 16, which, as you said, is high. So what is noticeable is that for the years 25, 26 and 26, 27, there's only one that you think the mitigation will help reduce the score. So I wonder if we are being over cautious, or whether that is just the situation we're in, and do we need to think about other mitigations? Because looking at the presentation of the budgets. There's lots of higher than anticipated, unforeseen, higher than usual places broken down, unexpected increase in ALN. So wondered, there are lots of statements like that. So I wonder how that links to the risk register, or is that in departments' risk registers? And whether we should be foreseeing some of these, and maybe we will in the future. And the thing was, I really appreciate, as I said, the hard work that's going into all this, and the effort that everyone's putting into, particularly like as you mentioned, Councillor Callard, item 4, a risk register item 4, applaud the way that we're looking at resource and the impact of resources and retention and well-being. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bond, and it's a really good point that with all the very hard work that goes on every day to ensure that services are delivered and delivered as well as possible, it's a very difficult thing to try and boil down and finish with a single number that actually assesses the level of risk in any particular area of a service. You can get hung up on the number, and I think it's much more important to be looking at what the direction of travel is and whether it's high or medium or low than very much a specific number. So I think your question is a very well put one. Who wants to pick that up? Richard, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So good morning, everyone. Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager for the Council. Thank you for your question, Councillor Bond. I think, as you said as well, Chair, it's important we use the risk levels to help us assess the overall risk, but equally we need to understand the level of complexity and detail that underpins these and how we then are targeting our mitigation at the various factors that underpin them. I think probably pick up a couple of the specific points Councillor Bond raised. In terms of the risk scores, probably a bit of wider clarification. So we assess the risk level pre-mitigation, so that's based on the evidence we have at the time of the assessments. That's before we take into account of any impact we expect our mitigation actions as we set out in the full risk register have. Appreciate most of those are high or medium, the majority are high. That also reflects a bit that to be a strategic risk, they have to be assessed as a high or medium level. Other lower level risks are managed through our other arrangements. The score then you see post-mitigation is where we assess that the risk level will be taking into account the impact of our mitigating actions. I think while some of those do remain high, some of them you will hopefully be able to see that we are assessing based on the latest progress and evidence of mitigating actions or anticipated future impact that there will be a reduction in the risk levels for some risks. For some risks, we're reflecting that at this stage there isn't expected to be a reduction. Some of those rationale for some of those reflects that maybe some of our mitigation might be in the early stages of being implemented, and we want to make sure, perhaps I think we're cautious, want to make sure that we can see the evidence really that underpins those that is starting to make a difference to the level of risk, but also some of the factors that are influencing some of these risks are complex and they're part of maybe wider as well societal and the factors that maybe are outside of direct control as well in terms of how we can target those mitigations. So there is a variety of reasons behind them, but I think the broad point about keeping our focus on are our mitigating actions having an impact on the risk levels, are we including the right mitigating actions, and are we targeting them specific enough is a point well made and something that we continue to keep in review as part of the risk register. In terms of risk identification and other related risks, so that the strategic risk register is very much the higher medium level risks to our objectives. We are introducing as part of the implementation of new policy directorate risk registers, and the rationale for those is we have 50 service business plans in the organisation, also at a service level, identify and manage risks to service areas. At the moment, those feed into one strategic risk register. The directorate risk register offers the opportunity for directorates to assess those across their directorates and almost act as that way of keeping a focus between one strategic risk register and 50 service business plans. So some of those risks that maybe not identified here are and will be, as they are developed by April 25, captured within those directorate risk registers. Clearly, where things escalate then have become more significant to a whole authority strategic level, they will appear on the strategic risk register. Equally, where hopefully some of those can be managed and are managed to the directorate level, they will stay on those directorate risk registers as well. So hopefully that helps just clarify in terms of the arrangements we have in place to manage the risks, and hopefully give some assurance about the challenge that goes into some of the scores and the assessment of the risk.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Bond?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, that they did go down. Some of them came down a little bit. Estimation, you're right. So you're suggesting that all those unforeseen and unpredicted, and all those will now be added to each directorate's risk register. That's what you're saying, is it? Thank you.
I think as much as we can foresee them, and we have the evidence for them, I think that's the purpose of the Director of Risk Register, is to get into more detail of the directors understanding their risks. The nature of risk sometimes is it's changing, it's evolving, and we have to keep up to date with that. So I think it's probably for me to give absolute assurance that every risk will be captured in those. As we become aware of them and as our assessment identifies them, we will look to include them. But that's the reason we've strengthened the risk process, is to strengthen identification of risks based on evidence. But the risk is an ever-changing field, and we need.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Other than the meteorite, there are very few risks that can't be foreseen. I would suggest, having done risk registers for many years. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's hope we don't get one of them, Councillor Bond. I think the council's got enough to contend with right now. But yeah, it's a well-made point that it's about the assessment of the landscape moving ahead, and a lot of that should be predictable. I see Councillor Buckler's hand up. Councillor Buckler.
I'm with you in hoping that we don't get a meteorite, I must say. Yeah, that's all we need. Actually, thank you, Richard, for the risk register update. I'd like to really, it's very general, what the risk register, and saying sort of, what level each risk is. I'd like to sort of find out what there are three things that have sort of leapt out at me. What you're doing to mitigate them. So with the financial sustainability and service delivery, given the persistent financial pressures that we've got over spending in social care and educational deficits, are there any key areas where further action or alternative approaches might be required to close the gap? To sort of, to ensure our long-term financial resilience. That's number one. Workforce challenges and retention, which we've touched on, more than once before, with critical recruitment and retention challenges impacting service delivery throughout the council, social care, education, in particular. Are there contingency plans in place for high-risk roles or sectors if these initiatives take longer to yield results? That's number two. And number three is the social care demand and placement sufficiency for children's and adults' services. Rising demand, complexity of cases, again, we've gone into this before, remains obviously a high risk. How is the council ensuring that measures are being taken to address potential workforce and provider problems in the medium term? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And just before answering that, Richard, I don't know if you'd be able to be as clear as possible about this. When we last looked at the demand from children's services, the actual numbers were not increasing, but the complexity of those within the system was. So in terms, we just need to be really clear that it's not everything, it's a particular area, and that doesn't make it easier. It's just for clarity that if it's not an increasing number of younger people coming forward but it's the complexity of their needs. Is that correct, Richard?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks for that, Chair. I think the risk is identified that originally there was an increase in demand. There's also that complexity of demand, and that is causing challenges in the system. And as part of the risk we identified, is probably in terms of the questions, is it helpful if I perhaps give a brief overview in terms of the mitigating actions set out in the risk, and then maybe hand over to colleagues in the room.
Thank you, Richard. That'd be good. Yeah.
Thank you for the questions, Councillor Buckler. Just taking those in turn. I think in terms of the financial risk, one of the key mitigating actions identified is around the medium-term financial strategy, as well as the in-year budget monitoring process as well. I know the committee would have scrutinised that report, strategies that came forward, and also identified within it was the programme of change, looking at the way the council operates in the future, and a lot of detail and work has gone into that, and I'll let colleagues who may want to come in on that in more detail add to it. In terms of workforce, chances of retention, again, another key progress that's been made in the last 6 months, which Councillor Callard mentioned in the introduction, was the development of the people strategy, which has got actions focused around the challenges of our workforce, but also how we recruit and retain the workforce we need both now and for the future. And again, I'll let colleagues come in more detail on that one. And then in terms of social care, demand and complexity of demand, that risk has been assessed, again, identified within the mitigating actions, mitigations put in place around commissioning and placement strategies, both in terms of children's social care and also commissioning home care within adult social care as well. So those are sort of some key mitigations identified within the risk register itself to help support mitigation of the risk. In terms of further detail, I'll ask if any colleagues would like to come in on their risks specifically.
Matthew?
Chair, so okay, if I just sort of pick up on a few of the first couple. Richard mentioned it's referred to in the report a programme for change. Clearly, we all understand that the fairly complex position facing public services, some of the examples around social care, the financial situation, and an ever-changing world, really. And we are the beginnings of a piece of work pulling together and prioritising some of that activity. One of our colleagues, Kath Fallon, is sort of picking up the lead for that work, and will be working closely with cabinet members to make sure that over the coming years we're not just looking at small changes to services, but looking how we can sort of radically reposition some of that work. And a lot of that work is already underway. I'm sure Councillor Chandler, for example, would talk about some of the real proactive work that's happened in his portfolio around social care to deliver things differently, and that's just one example. So I won't dwell too much on that one. If I talk then around, if I sort of pick up before passing over the workforce question, so apologies for those watching at home, Matthew Gatehouse, Chief Officer People, Performance and Partnerships, and I have the workforce brief. As Richard mentioned, last year Cabinet approved a new people strategy for the organisation, and a key part of that people strategy, it has a number of objectives, is recruiting and retaining. The very best thing we can do to have a workforce that's able to deliver our objectives is to keep hold of the good people that we have in this organisation. So we have a programme of work around the organisation at the moment, going out, talking to colleagues in their own workplace, understanding some of the challenges that they face, some of the frustrations they may experience, so that we can look at putting in place the solutions and things that can just sometimes make a difference to colleagues and keep them in Monmouthshire. At the same time, we are in the process and will be launching in January a new recruitment portal and website to really push the benefits of working in public service and working in local authorities to attract the very best to Monmouthshire and really sell the benefits of working here. And we've seen actually in a number of different sectors really different sort of proactive approaches to to recruiting people. Social care is another example where colleagues have recruited far and wide to bring in qualified social workers as one example. But this is an area where we just have to continually be looking at what others are doing to improve our game, because we're in a very competitive environment for labour, and we always have to try and stay one step ahead of that in terms of our recruitment and retention.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Chandler, did you want to respond on that and perhaps introduce yourself as well at the same time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's Councillor Ian Chandler. I'm the elected member for Lantinio Cresceni Ward and the Cabinet member for Social Care, Safeguarding and Accessible Health Services. Yes, I wanted to respond to Councillor Buckler's questions around the social care element, and thanks for the questions, because it is a key part of our strategic risk register, and very right to highlight it. There's a number of aspects there, and I may over-explain, but apologies for that. Going back, I think, to Councillor Bond's question, actually, I think just recognising that even post-mitigation, the risk is still high, and I think it's just looking at when we look at how we assess the risk factors, the impact. If we are unable to provide to meet the care and support needs of people, then the impact is high. That's nothing that is ever going to change. The question is about the likelihood of those things happening at the moment, because of the nature of both the funding constraints we're under and also the increasing demand coming from our population for a variety of reasons. Then that also stays as a likely scenario. It's a matter of how we're mitigating it. So looking at the question around children's services and the difference between increase in numbers and increasing of complexity of cases. We invest quite a lot in supporting families who are at risk of where the children are at risk of being brought into care, to try and support families to keep their children safe and to keep children home with their families where it is appropriate to do so. And that's part of our preventative agenda, and that's worked quite well in terms of actually stabilising a number of high-risk cases and actually keeping the numbers of children that we're looking after in care as stable, and in fact was declining slightly. That just in recent months, we've had an upcase of a few cases, and it doesn't take many cases to come into us to actually really shift our budgets, because looking after children is an expensive business. So we're quite vulnerable to sort of very specific cases, and if a case comes in, of course, we have to deal with it. It's not something we say, well, we don't have the money. Sorry, it is something we deal with, so we just sort it out. So we have had a small uptake in numbers recently. What I would say is, from a financial aspect, is that where we are preventing people coming into care, they are maybe at the lower risk end and the lower complexity end. And what it does mean is that where we've not been able to either prevent people coming into care or to support families enough so children can return to their families, they tend to be the more complex cases, which are inevitably also the more expensive ones for us to manage. So that does have an impact on our financial numbers. What are we doing to mitigate that? Well, there's a number of things that we are, as we highlighted earlier this year, we agreed a new strategy for children's placements, where we are converting homes within the county that we will run as both children's homes, small children's placement accommodation for our looked after children, and also step-out homes for 16 plus people leaving care who are able to then have supported living accommodation while they're finding their feet and getting ready to live more independently. This is having significant benefit to the children, because actually we're providing better care closer to home, closer to the communities and places that they know, closer to their birth families as well, and other support networks. But it's also having a benefit to us as well in terms of it's stabilising our dependency on sometimes a quite unstable provider market. Where we're having to, previously commissioning places from commercial providers, maybe out of the county. So that's giving us a level of control that is reducing our risk. We're also investing into recruitment of our in-house foster carers, which again will give us more options and reduce our risks. But that's a slower process, and like all councils across Wales, we are struggling to recruit the number of foster carers we need, so we're continuing to invest with Foster Wales to try and increase that. In terms of with adults, and I think you're right to highlight, and as colleague Matt Gatehouse said, the challenges of recruiting qualified workers in social care is a factor, and particularly in adult social care, where we have shortages of social workers and particularly occupational therapists who are able to work and do assessments, but also to work in reablement, and we would love to be able to do more in that regard. Again, in terms of, though, the provider market, we have taken steps there. So we've developed a new commissioning strategy for domiciliary care, where people living at home, where people come in to support them with personal care and other needs. Is up till now, we've been commissioning from commercial providers to provide care on a case-by-case basis, and that although that has some advantages from a provider market point of view, it doesn't give them any guarantees of work. It doesn't give them a stable ability to plan for the future. So we're bringing in a new commissioning strategy where we're basically block booking contracts in particular areas, so that we're saying to a provider, actually, we will commission you to provide a certain number of hours in this area, and then we will allocate the cases for you as and when they occur. That has the advantage. That means that the provider knows what they've got. They can recruit the staff that they need, provide a certain guarantee of hours for staff, and also be able to manage those staff's rounds in a more coherent way. We're just rolling this out at the moment. We're just in the process of negotiating the first round of contracts, which have gone out to public tender. But we believe that's going to have a good positive impact on the provider market and actually strengthen the situation of commercial providers providing domiciliary care. So these are the types of things that we've been doing to try and mitigate the risk. But at the end of the day, those risks are still there because the complexity coming in, and particularly with adult social care. As we know, we're in an ageing demographic in this county. We're at the forefront of that ageing demographic in Wales. We have the highest age profile in Wales, and that is set to increase. And with that increasing age profile becomes increasing demand. More people are starting to need social care, and what we need to do more of in the future, and what we're just starting to look at, is how we can do more in different ways to try and help extend people's healthy life expectancy. So preventing the need for them to come into social care, or delaying, should I say, the need for them to come into social care, so they can look at where is there more community support, where is there more other things they can do, and just keeping them more active. It's going to be a fairly medium to long-term project that we're not going to see immediate results, and it's linked into things like the work we've already set out to try and become an age-friendly county, other aspects that we're doing across leisure, across community development, and other aspects of our council's operations. So we are taking in other words, sort of summing up a very long answer to your question, we're doing a lot of different things, some of which are going to have more immediate impacts, some of which are going to have longer term impacts that are going to go beyond the lifetime of this administration, but we know they're the right things to do. It's just trying to mobilise the resources in order to make them happen, and to have the the steadfastness to stick with them even through the budgetary pressures we've got. So I hope that's a reasonable answer to your question, and sorry if I've over-explained it. Thank you.
Councillor Buckler, any follow-up?
Just a sort of quick one, actually, just to say thank you, Councillor Chandler, for that very interesting take on, what you're doing to change the way that provision is made for these services. So I'm sure incredibly helpful for all of us here today to hear that. So thank you, and thank you, Richard, as well, and Matthew.
Thanks, Councillor Buckler. I saw Councillor Powell with her hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for what you've been saying. It's very interesting. You were saying that whenever possible, you keep the children in the school, with its children involved, in the area where they're normally living and in the school they normally go to. Do you ever have to have them in a different school and moved away? Does that ever have to happen, or can you always manage to keep them in their own area?
I think I would say it's an aspiration in the majority of cases to keep them local. Obviously, every case is treated differently in the needs of that, and sometimes it is appropriate to move them out of the area. But no, the aspiration is to keep them local. Can we do it all the time? No, we can't.
No.
There's just not enough placements. We don't have enough foster carers. We're still in the process of developing more of our own homes for children to stay in, and we don't have enough around the county yet. So we are still dependent on ex-commercial providers, but we're taking steps to try and change that
whenever
at the moment.
You can, yes.
So yeah, but at the end of the day, every child is assessed independently about what's in their best interests within what we have available in terms of placements. So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. And just really linked to that, when we looked at the risk update earlier this year, in this particular area, Councillor Chandler, the report then, and I'm just sort of quoting it at that time, identified that the position of the Council in regard to its support for children at risk was likely to be exacerbated, said the report, by Welsh Government policy commitment to eliminate profit from the care of looked after children, which could lead to instability in the market. Now, what you've just been indicating is about commercial providers. The instability of the report and the discussion we had at the time earlier this year was partly the reduction in providers and the consequence of that being the increase in cost of providers caused by this policy to, quote, eliminate profit from the care of looked after children. Can you comment on that? Because that was a significant risk that appeared early in the year, and I'm not aware that it's disappeared or gone anywhere.
No, the risk still exists, but maybe it's changed its nature slightly over the past few months. The Welsh Government policy to eliminate profit from the care of children looked after is still there, and it's actually being embedded in the new Health and Social Care Bill, which is going through the Senate at the moment and is going through scrutiny. And yeah, there was, in terms of that process, is helping to bring in a level of predictability in terms of what's going to come from. And we've also, myself and other Cabinet members for social care through the WLGA have been talking with the Minister for Social Care and for Children, Dawn Bowden, to look at the impact of this. And certainly we've had clarity recently from the Minister that some of the timescales for the implementation of this policy are going to be extended in order to provide a level of certainty and a level of stability in the market. Having said that, the change is coming. So things are happening. The biggest So one of the impacts in terms of residential children's homes, as I said, we're taking steps to bring in our own in-house children's homes and post-16 supported accommodation in order to be less dependent on the commercial providers, who will no longer be able to use after the cut-off point. In terms of the fostering, we of the children that are in foster care placements, a number of them, and I haven't got the exact percentage in front of me, but it's something between around about a third of the children that we are looking after in sort of foster placements are within our own in-house foster carers. There's a number that are with what we call connected persons, foster parents, so this is usually kinship, extended members of the extended family who are looking after a child. And then a little over a third, are with what we call independent fostering agencies. That's foster carers who are employed by commercial fostering agencies. The indications are that those commercial fostering agencies who are making a profit from looking after children, and sometimes making quite a significant profit. A number of those are converting their business model into being non-for-profit organisations, and that's a process that the Welsh Government is working with them on that. How the outcome of that, will be is we will see where time goes on that. But in the meantime, we're making efforts to do more recruitment, and we will be bringing, we are also in the process of reviewing the fees and allowances that we pay to our own foster carers, our own in-house foster carers, to make that option more attractive to both retain and recruit new in-house foster carers, and that's part of what we're trying to do to mitigate that particular risk. So I'd say we're very, both we and the Welsh Government probably are very conscious of the risks of this change in policy in terms of eliminating profit and what that instability it's causing. But I think we are managing that process reasonably well, and we're not seeing any major impacts at the moment, but we're very conscious of it, so we're monitoring it all the time. I hope that's a sufficient answer to the question.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. Just before we finish, a couple of other areas, and this might be, the first of them might be for, I'm not sure whether Councillor Callard or Richard or Matthew would pick this one up. The risk number 2, which is about the sustainability of some services, which is obviously an easy thing to say, but that, if you just think about what that specifies, that is extraordinarily important. The post-mitigation of the highest level of risk that is assessed at 16 for that particular risk, and that's the highest level of risk throughout the 3 years, including this year. Post-mitigation, it remains high at 12, but it's come down from 16 to 12. And I'm just trying to understand on what basis that we're reducing as I said earlier, I'm not overly fussed about, whether it's a 12 or, the specific number, but if the direction of travel is that we're reducing the assessed level of risk after mitigation, but we'll be looking at the latest financial update in a minute that says the situation in this financial year is deteriorating very substantially financially. On what basis can we say post-mitigation, at the very least for this year, is somehow reduced? I don't see the kind of magical way in which that could have happened. So if I could ask that one, but just finally also on children's services, they're very much linked in the same way. Risk number 6 through to 9B, we've got children's services projected at running for the next 3 years at a very high risk score of 12. And I think that is something that we should all be really concerned about, because children's services, they stand out there as extraordinarily important. I'm sure we'd all agree about that, and the safeguarding of every young person within that system. To be running it at a high risk of 12 by our assessed risk, throughout the next 3 years, I think is a really serious concern. One might say that there is a particular problem in a given year, but we will deal with it, and after that the risk will come down. But how on earth can we project a continuous, very high level of risk? So I wonder if we could start with the first of those and then on to the second. Who wants to pick up the question on risk number 2? Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair. I'll bring in Richard in just a moment, if that's okay, to talk specifically about the changes in how the risk has been calculated around the financial sustainability of services. The risk is still very high after the mitigation. I know Councillor Chandler's been speaking about some of the changes we're making to some of our particular high-risk services with regards to financial sustainability. It's work that continues. It's going to remain a high-risk area because, unfortunately, there is a lag between the implementation of the changes that we are making. You know, they are not they're not overnight changes; they're longer pieces of work, and the pressure that the services are seeing. Why is the risk falling over a period of time? I'll bring in Richard to explain how it's being calculated. You made mention of the in-year position, which we'll talk about in the next report, and you're right to mention that since we brought month 3 to this committee, month 6, there is a deteriorating position in month 6. I would say, however, that since the autumn budget, the outlook is looking better for public services spending. There was a significant increase indicated in money that will be coming to public services across the whole of the UK. And I do think that's going to go some way to try and arrest this pressure that we are seeing in our public services kind of over the medium term. But Richard, do you want to talk a little bit more specifically about the risk?
Thanks for that, Councillor Callard. I think, again, just a reminder about the assessment of risk level and probably particularly drawing some of the mitigating actions that have been identified that are assessed to reduce that. So again, just a reminder, risk level pre-mitigation is assessed based on the evidence we have prior to any mitigation being applied. Post-mitigation is the impact of the actions we are taking both now and assessed to be in the future in reducing the risk. Some of the mitigating actions there in your chair you mentioned in terms of the work being done around budget recovery and continue to monitor budget savings delivery within the year. Hoping to bring that back into a balanced budget position, and that's assessed to help support reduction of the risk level. And then also, we've talked earlier, not just looking at within the year, but also looking over both next year and the medium term, the budget process that has been established to look at 25-26, and then the medium term financial strategy, looking at planning over the medium term and some of the plans and the programme for change that Matthew mentioned earlier as well that are in place. So those have been taken into consideration in the reduction as assessed at the moment. Clearly, as we implement those, we keep those under review and monitor them. The risk levels will be assessed as part of that. If the situation changes, if it either improves or if there is the risk level is assessed to increase, then we will look to review the risk levels post-mitigation as shown. But I think Councillor Callard has highlighted the nature of the high risk that remains, but with those mitigating actions, that's the current assessment of the levels. But again, in a dynamic environment where things are changing, new evidence coming in and progress in mitigating actions is being assessed, that'll be kept under review.
Thank you, Richard. I'm still very mystified how we can be looking at a seriously worsening situation at the end of the first half of the year and yet be reducing the perceived level of risk for this year in our risk update. I've not heard anything that explains why that would be. What we were being told earlier in the year, several times in previous reports, was that the reduction in the risk around the expenditure challenges depended very heavily on the transformation of the operational model, and again I quote from the previous reports that have been brought to us, and that's been something that's been mentioned in those reports as a very important issue, and I see nothing at all about transforming the operational model now. Has that just been dropped, or have we missed something? Because where is that transformation model? We were definitely being told that that was something we should be expecting to see coming into play later in the year. Is that happening such that the level of risk is reducing over expenditure? It's trying to join those dots up, but that particular dot seems to have disappeared entirely. Matthew.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks, Chair. It's a good question. I think a lot of this is being worked through as part of the budgetary process at the moment, and you'll see, members will see, and apologies for probably the language and the way it's represented here doesn't refer to the word transformation, but we've used the word in this report, programme for change, which is the piece of work I mentioned earlier on. So there is transformative work underway. It hasn't been dropped, but I would recognise that nor has that been sort of put into this political space for scrutiny yet. That will come, but a lot of that work is at an earlier stage. A lot of it is developed. You know, some of the programmes, the activities that Councillor Chandler talked to earlier on, for example, they are all part of that programme for change, and a number of services are transforming, just not under a particular single banner or badge that you would sort of put it together as a single entity. The point that's made around the reducing risk level, bear in mind, each year we do face a high risk in terms of budget. Well, it's been recognised by Councillor Callard that probably the situation in the current year, and we'll go on to this as one of the later items, is there are some signs of light there, and in terms of the budget settlement that we're looking at. Each year, before taking any actions, we are facing a high risk. However, we do have, as an organisation, as an authority, a good track record of keeping services running through mitigating actions. If you look at the services that were in place 5 years ago, things have changed, things have evolved, but actually a lot of actions have been put in place to enable us to keep running those frontline services. And we continue to be able to operate those. And I wouldn't say, if we were to look, for example, at the in-year risk of services closing, I would say, I think it would be reasonable to say that level of risk reduces from high to medium. And then as we look to future years, we have time to embed that programme of change and again make sure that those mitigating actions through that programme for change are able to continue to reduce that level from high to medium. But absolutely, Chair, recognise that this is a dynamic picture, and it is something which all of us alike, I think members and officers, are watching and paying particular regard to, because this is a challenging situation.
And we do recognise that there's no suggestion whatsoever that these are anything other than very difficult challenges, but the challenges don't become any easier if we're not realistic about them, and we need to be clear in the language we use. So that the programme for change, that sounds like it's going to be important, and we welcome it, I'm sure. But what we were being told repeatedly was that there would be a transformation of the operating model of the council, which is a very distinctive thing from a programme of change in some of our services doing things a bit differently. So don't want to extend that too long, but it doesn't help anybody if we're told something a few months ago that is going to be brought in front of us over the forthcoming months that somehow doesn't appear to be there when we get to those forthcoming months, and it's morphed into something else. So I just make that point. But if I could come to the second of the questions about children's services and running them at a very high risk for 3 years. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. I did want to just sort of slightly clarify, because I think in your question you slightly conflated safeguarding from children's services, and I just want to see them make sure they're separate, so that reassuring both members and members of the public who are listening to this meeting that the risk that we have around safeguarding, risk 6, which is in there because it's such an important duty for us. We're not rating that as a high risk. We're rating that as a medium risk. Clearly, the impact of any safeguarding incident is going to be major, but we're seeing that we don't see that it is a likely risk, but clearly within safeguarding you can never eliminate any risk in safeguarding, so it's always possible that there will be some incident, some failure of safeguarding. And remind members that of course we presented the annual safeguarding report to full council in October, where we went through both the performance over the year, but also what measures we're doing to continuously improve our ability to keep people safe. So that's I just wanted to really emphasise and separate out the issue of safeguarding. That's safeguarding both adults and children in the service, which you can never be content with. We're continually trying to improve, but we're not rating that as a high risk. In terms of children's services more generally, though, in terms of how do we looking after children who are vulnerable, making sure they get the care and support they need, either within their family or within a foster placement or residential placement. As I've said, we're taking steps to, at the very preventative end, to try and support families, particularly families who are struggling to manage better, to be able to look after their children better, to keep their children safe and nurtured. But when it comes in, but when a situation comes in where we do need to bring a child of whatever age into our care, we do it. And I think that, the risk is that it's going to have an impact on our budget. The risk is not that we're going to close the door and say, you're not coming in. And I think I just really want to emphasise that to the people. It is just, we will do it. We will do what it takes. And that's where the risk is, that it's going to have an impact, but I really do want to try and ensure as we go through ever tightening budgets that we preserve the money we're spending on prevention and supporting families, so that we don't, because if we take away that money, then we're going to have an ever spiralling amount of demand in the higher cost area of looking after children. And I would say that, obviously, as we know, we're not immune to this. Every council in Wales, every council in the United Kingdom is facing the same problem with demand on children's services, and whether however we take that, we will deal with it as we can. So I hope that gives you sufficient reassurance, Chair, on that particular aspect.
And just to say once again, we fully recognise this is not unique to Monmouthshire County Council. This is an extraordinary challenge right across the country, and councils are looking to deal with this in their own way. But it does come down to very significantly what every council is doing about this. I just point out to you that whilst you're identifying the risk 6 as the area that relates to safeguarding, that's certainly not the way I read it. Item 7 is risk 7 is the risk of harm if we are unable to meet the care and support needs of some vulnerable children, and risk 8, risk of harm if we are unable to meet the care and support needs of some vulnerable adults. And what we looked at a few months ago in an update report was that we were actually unable to assess the needs of some vulnerable adults in a timely manner. And that is a safeguarding issue. And equally, if we're identifying the risk of harm that may lead to harm for some vulnerable children, and separately risk 8 for some vulnerable adults, I wouldn't see that. I don't think it is correct to say that these are not safeguarding issues. And they are rated by our own council as high at 12 for the next 3 years. And that was the underlying point behind that, really. But I appreciate the response that you've given. I see, Councillor Pavia, you have your hand up, and Thank you for being patient.
No, no, thanks, Chair. Thanks for bringing me in, and apologies, I'm having problems with the raised hand function. Just to follow on one of your points there, I obviously reading the narrative alongside the risks and mitigations for social care, and in addition to the narrative on the next item in terms of financial update, and it's clear that there are efforts to embed practice change. But it feels like it's challenging. The ongoing programme of reviewing existing care remains challenging because of the pressures of managing new referrals and assessments. So I suppose it touches on the point you made about realism and looking at further change within the programme change in terms of reorganisation, reorganising service delivery models. Is there the capacity within the social care department to do that, to realise and undertake that work whilst dealing with the day job? Is that something that is feasible moving forward, or is it something that we're going to have to look to bring in external support to allow us to do that? So I suppose that's directed at I'd say that's probably directed at the cabinet member for the question. And I've got one more slightly tangential question, but it is linked. And I'm just listening to Richard Horne, who's the UK's cybersecurity chief, speaking on the radio this morning, and he's given a speech on the increased risk and sophistication and intensity of cyber attacks from external actors and criminal gangs. And he was emphasising not just the sort of critical infrastructure, but supply chains and particularly public sector supply chains. And I'm thinking about the multitude of suppliers that are involved in the social care supply chain, providers of care. And are we doing enough to satisfy ourselves that those suppliers that we do business with are sophisticatedly and sufficiently dealing with potential cyber attacks? Are we confident? Is that something we look at in terms of our commissioning and procurement frameworks? Are we doing enough to ensure that our supply chains are robust? Thanks, Chair.
Are you thinking particularly in terms of confidential data?
Yeah, confidential data is probably the key one in terms of dealing with vulnerable adults and children.
Thank you. And Councillor Chandler, I don't know if you wanted to pick those points up related to children's services.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Pavia. And good question, good insight on that. Because, like a lot of parts of the council over years of squeezed budgets, the capacity at that management level to manage change has been squeezed. There's no two ways about it. But in terms of children's services, what we've done is we have recruited a new service manager to manage our children's placements programme. So the developing of the new children's placements, in the residential placements. We've got that additional capacity, a skilled person who's had experience from that from a neighbouring local authority, and that has given the management team within children's services a lot more freed up capacity to work on other areas. So yes, it would be great to have more officers. I'm not going to say that it wouldn't be needed, but I think we're content that we've taken what steps we can in children's services to reorganise the staffing framework to that management span in order to deliver the changes that we need. So I hope that's sufficient reassurance.
On the question of cyber and supply chains, Matthew, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll come in on this one, and apologies, we don't have our sort of detailed officer experts on the cyber side in the committee today. Members will be aware that's sort of detailed as a separate and standalone risk. Yeah, absolutely, it's one of the biggest risks facing not just our organisation, but any public body and company out there. We've seen some bad actors out there intent on disrupting the work of both companies and public bodies alike. Members will be aware, but those at home may not. We actually do employ our own head of cyber security, who works not just for Monmouthshire. We employ them, but they also support other public bodies in South East Wales on the SRS footprint and work with them. And when we enter into contractual arrangements with new suppliers, an assessment of their information governance arrangements is part of that process, albeit they don't have the same degree of support from our central service. Each of those organisations is responsible for their own cybersecurity arrangements, but we do have support and guidance available for them where needed. But absolutely right, for anybody, any single organisation out there, this is a crucial risk for us. And we have our information governance group and head of cyber out there ensuring that, firstly, our arrangements are secure, but secondly, in the event of any breach or loss of information, we have the backup systems there in order to be able to dial that back and recover, to minimise the risk to the organisation from cyber attacks. But absolutely recognise the point in Councillor Pavia's question. This is not just about us. This is about the vulnerability of all aspects of the supply chain. And while we have assurance around our own arrangements, that degree lessens the further that supply chain is from us as an organisation.
Thank you, Matthew. And Councillor Pavia, are you content with that? Great, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for the responses and for the questions, and the areas of discussion have been so important. So, our role is not to try and add to the problems, but to just make sure we're talking through what the challenges really look like, with a view to being realistic about them and, as much as possible, assisting in all of that. We wish you, all the best with dealing with these challenges regarding the risks that the council faces. I'm going to move us on to, first of all, I'll move that risk update as a report, and see no difficulty with that around the committee. So we'll move on to the next item. I'm just going to call a 5-minute break while we change some of the lead characters, and call a 5-minute break, and we'll restart again on the finance update in 5 minutes' time at about 11:18, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're going to restart the meeting. Thank you for allowing a slight break for everybody, and we'll kick off with item number 3 on the agenda, which is the finance update. And for that, I'm pleased to say we've got the officer and the cabinet member responsible. Councillor Callender, do you wish to introduce the report, and then we'll move across to John if you wanted to say any additional items and into questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The first half of the 2024-2025 financial year has seen the continuation of financial headwinds, which are having a significant impact upon the Council's service operating environment. The committee will have heard all of these before, but I'll repeat them for completeness. And they are the wider and longer lasting impact of the pandemic, both economically and socially, continues to impact the Council, particularly in areas of homelessness, children's services, adult social care and children's additional learning needs. The cost of living challenges continue to have an impact on our communities, with the consequential increase in demand for council services and impact upon income generating services. And while headline inflation has fallen, some areas of council services continue to experience cost pressures on supplies and services alongside supply chain issues. In continuing efforts to combat inflation, interest rates have remained high, with revised forecasts suggesting that they will remain higher for longer than anticipated at the time of setting the budget. And we also continue to deal with a shortage of staff resources in some areas. At the October 2024 meeting, Cabinet received a financial update reporting a forecast budget deficit of £3,388,000. This position has since deteriorated by a further £964,000 to an updated forecast budget deficit of £4,353,000. Appendix 1 details the variances in forecast spend against budget across the services, but it will come as no surprise to this committee that the greatest pressure is felt in adults and children's social care, with a combined forecast overspend of just over £4 million. With regards to the savings targets, services are currently forecasting a shortfall of £2,176,000, or 19.9% in meeting the service savings targets that were set as part of the original budget for 2024-2025. And that's a deterioration of 1.1% from update 1, where we were 18.8%. Away from the target, and full details can be found in Appendix 2 to this report. The budget planning framework for 2024-2025 was clear that there is a need to progress the Council on a path towards financial sustainability, including conserving an appropriate and prudent level of financial resilience, of which the Council's reserves are a key component. As a consequence, the final revenue budget proposals for 2024-2025 did not include any use of reserves to meet recurrent revenue expenditure. The delivery of a balanced budget position for 2024-2025, alongside substantial budget recovery action within schools, remains fundamental in maintaining the financial stability and limiting any further impact upon the Council's reserves. The ongoing financial position of the Social Care and Health Directorate remains the key risk within this forecast, making up nearly 90% of the overall deficit budget. The level and complexity of demand for both adults and children's care continues to trend upwards and is outstripping the progress being made in placement and practice change. The ongoing programme of reviewing existing adults' care provision remains challenging because of the pressure of managing new referrals and assessments. Equally, as the NHS retrench around their own cost pressures, there has been little progress in successfully pursuing continuing healthcare costs. However, the positive autumn budget statement delivered by the Chancellor provided significant support for the Welsh Government budget, with indications that part of this funding will be available to support in-year budgetary pressures. Given the forecast deficit of £4,353,000, it's essential that all council services maintain the same financial discipline and engage in similar collective budget recovery action that saw significant improvement in the second half of the 2023-2024 financial year. In order to deliver this, a range of mitigation measures will need to be implemented, including but not limited to maximising all grant and income opportunities, including the transfer of core costs into grant where conditions allow, Vacancy management, with a targeted freeze on filling vacant posts. Bearing down on all non-essential expenditure. Service efficiency savings. Maximising the opportunity to meet the costs of organisational reform from capital receipts where regulations allow. And a review of the capital budget with a view to repurposing budgets or pausing some capital investment. To date, services have indicated potential budget recovery measures of just over £1 million, which continue to be developed and currently sit outside the forecasts in this report. Should these be delivered in full, the budget deficit would reduce to £3,334,000. We continue to support the services to take the steps required in order to bring this year's budget into balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And it's worth, preliminary comments to recognise that the challenges that are faced by Monmouthshire County Council are being faced right across the country, and that there are no easy solutions. So we do really recognise this as a very challenging period of time. John, did you want to add anything? And we'll open it to questions. And if you just introduce yourself as you do that, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And just briefly, Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance, Monmouthshire. I think Councillor Callard's made a very good job of taking us through the key points. I think importantly, it's to recognise the level and complexity of demand that a lot of our high risk and cost services are seeing. I just wanted to mention that our enhanced financial scrutiny measures are continuing over this period. I think whilst a lot of people will be looking forward to Christmas at the moment, I can assure you that finance teams are caught up in a lot of the work that is needed in terms of ensuring that all of those measures that Councillor Callard has gone through are being robustly looked at by services, and all of the flexibilities that we can and should be implementing are looked at fully. So I think just some reassurance that the arrangements of the Financial Management Board and the enhanced monitoring arrangements that we've put in continue, and we're hoping that will bring through further benefit as we come into the next financial update post-Christmas. So happy to take any questions as mentioned, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, John, and we'll move over to Councillor Buckler. I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Callard and Jonathan, for your introduction. I mean, I have got lots of questions, but I'm just going to give a sort of broad one, really. Councillor Callard sort of mentions that there are strategies in place to try and address this enormous budget deficit of 4.35 million. The shortfall in meeting 19.9% of budgeted service savings targets and critical risks like rising social care demand, ALN, as in additional learning need pressures, and declining financial resilience. What steps are you taking? You mentioned you're taking steps. What are you taking as the administration to prevent further financial deterioration and ensure a sustainable recovery? How will you address structural issues such as schools growing deficits and underfunded services to prevent future shortfalls and retain essential services? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Councillor Callard, did you want to kick off? And
Thank you for the question, Councillor Buckler, and thank you, Chair. I think very good points. Just to put that deficit in perspective, it's about 2% of our revenue budget, so it is significant. I think Councillor Chandler in our last item actually spoke about a lot of the work that's ongoing within health and social care in order to try and deliver change there, so it is on a more sustainable financial footing. But I think he also made the point very clearly that we're delivering care, we're going to continue to deliver care, and when more people come to receive care from us, we're going to provide it. And when that care is more complex, we're going to provide it. That's what we do as an authority. So I think what we've seen as a trend, certainly this year and in the last couple of years, is in order to support the increased demand that we need, that we're seeing in health and social care, is that we are looking to other areas of the authority in order to support that. I think that's what our residents will be seeing as well when, in last year's budget, the opening hours of the leisure centres were changed. That's not something that we want to do. I would love it if our leisure centres could remain open for longer. But in order to provide the care that we need to provide, it's a decision that we had to take. And I think in the hierarchy of need, it's a decision that I'm comfortable with. You mentioned as well the schools' deficit balances. That is a particular concern. We have started the process of working with the schools through their recovery plans, and have done so with a couple of the secondary schools already. They are bringing plans forward which are comprehensive and they are detailed, and they show a clear path for our schools in order to get them back away from a deficit position over the, I would say, the medium to longer term. We don't want, this needs to be a gradual thing. We don't want a shock to our schools, especially as you'll be aware that so much of their spending is spent on staff costs. I think it's about 85% of the school's budget. So we're working together with the schools to try and manage that situation, and like I said, over the medium to longer term, to bring them back into balance in a sustainable way. I don't know if anybody else wants to pick up any of those points.
Just before we move to John, if you're coming in there, but just on this particular issue of the management of related to what we've just been discussing, the management of risk, and completely appreciate, and I think everyone would completely understand that your priority is ensuring that people receive the support that they need. But the risks that we've just been talking about, risk number 7 and 8, specify that the risk is of harm to children and the risk of harm to adults. It's not the risk is to more budget overspend. So you might need to look back on your assessment of risk, because if what you're saying is the guiding hand of the council's approach, the risk is not about harm, the risk is about budget, because those two things don't seem to be consistent. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd say that's probably reading it the wrong way round. And when you look at our in-year position, you can see that the money is being spent on the care. So the risk is not the money being spent on the care, because the money is being spent on the care, which is why we've got over £4 million overspend in social care. The risk here is making sure that that care is provided, and I think you can see from these results that care is being provided. Councillor Chandler earlier talked about a lot of the good work that's going on within the service to try and I guess control the front door a little more, try and make sure people are looked after in a way that, I guess, manages people's conditions so they don't deteriorate. So these care packages don't become high cost care packages. And I know Councillor Chandler can speak at length about that. You did earlier. I found it very interesting. But the risk here, it's not identified as a financial risk, because we know as an authority that that's not where this goes. We spend the money. You can see that from this. We're going to continue to spend the money. It's just the financial risk is almost secondary to the risk of harm, because that's the I guess the most important thing is that there's no unnecessary harm being caused.
Yeah, I'm not criticising this, Councillor Carroll. I'm just really saying that the two things seem to be inconsistent. That we've just had the discussion in the previous hour about a high risk, as you've assessed it, of harm for both children and adults. Not that you will not allow harm, and any leeway that is required will be at the risk of budget. I just don't think those two things can possibly be consistent. Councillor Chandler, were you looking to come in on that? And we'll move on. I don't want to distract from the focus of this report, but we need to ensure we've got consistency. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can provide some clarification that might help. And I think, if we're looking at the risk register, we are assessing, if nothing changes, that is the risk. So if we stuck to, our budget, that would be a real risk. What we're saying is, of course, we're not going to let that happen. There is some risks. There is some harm. And I think harm is a very broad spectrum of things. There is some harm. So in terms of, as you highlighted when we were discussing the risk register, the delays in adults getting assessments for their social care needs does present some harm. It's not a safeguarding risk in terms of abuse and neglect, but it is a risk. There is some level of harm that is being caused because of those delays. So I think it's fair to acknowledge that those delays are there, but we're managing those delays as well as possible and trying to really keep a focus on that, recognising that some areas it is a bit like spinning plates, because as you're doing assessments in one area in order to get people discharged out of hospital quickly, then means that you're not getting assessments in another area where somebody's at home and needing support for some of their personal care. But those, we are sort of managing those delays as best as we can, and in terms of children, again, you could say the harm is that they're not in the most ideal placement. If we don't have good nurturing local foster carers and we have to put them with a commercial foster carer out of county, in many ways that is also causing harm. So those are the areas of harm. They're not safeguarding risks in those respects. The children are still being looked after, they're still safe, but it's not necessarily the most optimal nurturing environment that they could be in. So I think that's where the harm comes into that risk register. But clearly, where we have a statutory responsibility, where we do an assessment, somebody has a statutory need for social care, a child has a statutory need to be looked after, we fulfil those statutory needs. No question. That is just done. So that's if that is hopefully that's the clarification between what we're talking about in the risk register and what we're talking about in the budget pressures. The budget pressures are because people have statutory needs, and it happens, as we've said, in the report says, that the number of children that we're looking after has increased. We had a reduction in the first quarter, but the second quarter, that reduction's been gone. And, it doesn't take much in order, when we're looking at high cost of care, high cost of placements, it doesn't take many individual cases to completely push our budget over. So, and we give quite a bit of detail in the paper about where we add on that. As I said, it's, when you've got, just trying to pick out something there, is somebody 2 additional residential placements.
Sorry, Councillor Chan, I do want to keep to the questions rather than talking about things that are always going to be very important about what's going on there. And I would invite you to have another look at your risk assessment, because as an Alice in Wonderland, you can't have 100 completely different things said before breakfast and tie them all together, and the risk assessment is very clear the way it's expressed. But coming back to Councillor Buckler's questions, I think you were very much focused on what other steps can be taken to prevent further deterioration, Councillor Buckler, and dealing with the structural issues such as in schools. So, Jonathan, I think you might have been just about to touch on that.
Thank you, Chair. I think we started to go into some of the conversation around the programme of change in the earlier item, and I think the medium-term financial strategy made it clear that that was the piece of work that would look to change the approach to service delivery over time. I think it was clear that that was looking to have more medium to longer term benefits, and there's reasons for that. I think Councillor Callard mentioned earlier that these things don't happen overnight. Clearly, we're looking at what areas of that can be accelerated and can give us more immediate benefits, both the remainder of this year, but also into next financial year as we look to the budget process for that. There's a range of measures within that. Councillor Buckler, I won't repeat them all, but some of the preventative measures that Councillor Chandler has touched upon, the digital approach, our approach to accommodation strategy. We've seen that approach adapt this year through the development of, for example, homelessness accommodation, the introduction of more permanent children's homes and bringing those on stream. So I think unfortunately sometimes a lot of this is cost mitigation rather than savings, and I think the balance between that is quite difficult to demonstrate sometimes. So yes, we're coming in with what is still a considerable overspend. A lot of that work already that's been developed this year has stopped that being even worse. So I think when we look at perhaps the school's position, Councillor Callard is right to point to that staffing cost being most significant. It's clearly going to be a recovery over a longer period of time. The pressure on schools to deal with some of the issues they're facing, both post-pandemic, behavioural and attendance issues, it isn't something that can be just solved overnight, and there's a need to approach that in a more responsible way. The challenge for us as a finance collective is what risk does that present to us from a financial resilience and sustainability perspective, and lots of work going on around that at the moment to model that through. We know that with schools looking to go further into deficit, that's going to be a pull on our financial resources, and we'll have to manage that as part of the overall budget situation. So no one answer to that question, but there's a range of measures which we've outlined both in the report and in the earlier medium-term financial strategy that are all underway, and that programme of change has reference with our colleague Kath Fallon coming on stream to do some work around that. It's going to be vital in bringing that to conclusion.
Thank you. And Councillor Buckler, were there any follow-ups that you had?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that those answers. There's just really sort of, as far as I'm concerned, sort of major concern in hearing your answers, and I take the point of you're changing things. And Jonathan, you mentioned cost mitigation versus savings. Now the budget deficit is big, 4.35 million. And set to get bigger, and really we want to be, there's not a magic money tree. We want to be assured that you're looking at preventative rather than reactive. So Councillor Callard mentions that there'll always, care will always be provided, as it should be, but surely we should be looking at prevention first and foremost, because the money will run out if we're not on the ball. But thank you. I sort of appreciate that lots is being done. So progress is good. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. I see that as a comment rather than a particular question, and noted. I'm going to ask Councillor Bond. You have your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the update, which of course takes resource and time of your own. So thank you for that, keeping us updated. Understand the common pressures for all local authorities, and applaud everyone for their efforts to overcome those pressures. It must be really tough. I've got 3 questions, please. One around school deficit, one around waste and resource application, and one around performance, please. So the first one around schools deficit, it says in the report, there's 3.6, I think 20 out of 34 schools are in deficit. What about the other 14? How close are they, please? And also identified is, I think it was Pembroke Primary, that's got 155k deficit. I wonder why that's higher than others. Perhaps someone can share that, please. Waste and resource applications. So with the reduced resource, obviously, because we've got vacancies, I wonder, are we being creative? You are suggesting that there's lots of work in the medium long term that's going to come to fruition. So the examples, for example, bearing down on non-essential expenditure, how we're doing that. We talked about reducing waste last time, and you're talking about that now, of doing lean principles and process mapping. Wonder if there's any examples you could give us. And the joined up approach of looking at resource, for example, we've got an example in Caldecott where we didn't have the resource to progress the work on Castle Park School, but we're delivering a project that some of us don't think is necessary at this time, an active travel project. So reviewing, Councillor Callard said you're reviewing the capital budget, so I hope that's progressing well, because in the light of perhaps precepts going up, people want to see that the right projects are being done, and also they're fit for purpose. So any reviews and right first time fit for purpose information would be very useful. So then the third question is around performance, and it's I picked out that the leisure centres are performing very well, or at least there's an underspend and there's lots of membership, which is fantastic. I wonder if we can get some information as to the memberships relative to each of the towns. I noticed Caldecott's always put last in the list, but I'm sure I wonder where they are in the whether it's never alphabetical or town size, but anyway, but wonder if we can see what membership there is. I guess because of the situation, we're never going to get our struggling leisure centre to have any money spent on it, even though I know has been on all the other leisure centres recently. So the performance, that was the leisure centres being good, and also I'm going to mention it again, as I always do, Newport Leisure Park and Castlegate. We promised last time that it's going to be okay. There's not, the vacancies are reducing. We've got a deal with Cineworld. Things are looking better. Are we being a bit over optimistic? Can we be a bit more realistic in our assessments and our positivity? I wonder if we're encouraged to think there's positive things every time, but then let down when the budget comes back, or the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And who wants to pick that one up? Jonathan, did you want to, or Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to wonder if we got Nikki Wellington here, who's our expert on schools' finances, might want to come in on the questions about the school deficit balances. Is that okay, Nikki?
Yes, good morning. Nikki Wellington, Support Services Manager. So just in terms of the deficits, that they're all outlined in Appendix 3. So the school by school, so you'll be able to have a look at those, and you'll be able to see how close some of the schools are. There's a number under 10,000, but there's a range across all of the, up to the 155,000 that you've picked up with Pembroke. Just on the subject of Pembroke, Pembroke has seen over the last few months some changes in its staffing. A deputy head teacher is leaving, and they've had staff that are retiring. So when, obviously they've been able to make some savings on that. And in addition to that, they've had some additional learning needs income that's gone into the budget to support pupils where staff were already in place and they were paying for that. Thank you.
Chair, can I come back to that, please?
Yes, of course, Councillor Bond.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Nikki, for your response. Really, it's for residents that they won't be piling through a massive document to identify. So say 20 out of 34 are close to, so how many others are in the next couple of years going to be in deficit, please?
I think it's too early to say at this stage, Councillor. We are, obviously we're working through the budgets with schools now, but when we know what the 25-26 budgets will be set at, we will obviously be doing the forecasts with the schools at the moment. Those are currently in a deficit, and I think John's gone through quite clearly the process that we've worked with schools on the deficit plan. But I think at this stage, obviously we're monitoring on a monthly basis with our schools, and we just await the proposals for the 25-26.
Just related to that, Nikki, if I may, and it might be that, John, you respond on this, but how does any school manage a deficit? Who provides the bridging finance to be able to move through to the following year?
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah, a bit of a technical question, I guess, but whilst those budgets are delegated to schools and it is up to the head teachers and governing boards to approve and manage those budgets, any deficit would sit on the council's balance sheet, and I think, as I alluded to earlier, is a pull on the council's overall financial resilience, and I think that's why it's important that overall approach to budget recovery plans by schools is kept on the radar. We're clearly doing a big piece of work around that, meeting with quite a few of the schools that are in significant deficit. Other schools have come back and engaged really well with us in terms of setting out their budget recovery plans. Those are at a more minor level. We will ensure that those discussions continue and they are monitored. It's the ones that are more significant is where the key piece of work will continue. Both Councillor Carroll, myself and Councillor Graucott meeting with those secondary schools regularly over the past few weeks to really get to the bottom of what those plans look like. But to go back to the question, Chair, it is a pull on those council balance sheet resources, and something we have to keep a close eye on in terms of that global financial position of the council.
Thank you. So back to Councillor Bond's questions, if I may, John. It's a question about are we being creative, and examples of that. I think in particular Councillor Bond was asking about waste and resource, and then asking about Performance Leisure Centre membership, and separately Newport Leisure and Castlegate. Are we being overly optimistic? Just those questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off, if that's okay. On the, I think my notes might be different to what the Chair just picked up then, but you talked a bit about capital budgets and active travel, Councillor Bond, is that right?
I talked about being creative with resource, because Castle Park haven't had some work done because they didn't have resource, but then we're using resource on a project that some of us don't think is necessary at this time. So talking about the priorities and how, whether you're looking holistically, which you suggested, you were looking at the capital, reviewing the capital budget and also reducing waste and your long-term changes in performance, and I would suggest review of right first time and all the project performance.
Okay.
Joined up approach.
Thanks for that, Councillor Bond. I think that's a very good point, and this I know all the directorates in the council work incredibly hard to make every pound go as far as it can. I think sometimes there's fair criticism from the public that there are appearances that money could be better spent elsewhere. You mentioned active travel schemes. I hear about that in my role as a ward councillor as well. But I think it's it's a different, it's sometimes a difficult one to explain to the public because it's all public money. But in terms of the money that's available to us to spend in certain ways, we are limited into how we can spend certain money in certain places. And a lot of, grant money is specifically allocated towards active travel, and therefore, as much as we'd like to spend it on, fixing potholes in the roads, we can't do that. And I think that's, it can be frustrating for the public, and I think it can be frustrating for us as councillors as well, but I think it would be remiss of us not to maximise the money that is available to us in grant and spend it on, improving the connectivity in our communities. We talked about Castle Park School and investment in Castle Park School there. But perhaps it's a conversation we can take offline with the Education Directorate. It's not something that's come across my desk in terms of investment in Castle Park School, but I'd be happy to take it up with you and talk it through with you. I'm sorry, Councillor Bond, did you want to come back in?
Yes, please. It was really about the resource, because the budget's already there. It was S106 number, section 106 money, and it's not about the money, and everybody's for active travel, totally for it. That wasn't the challenge. It was the resource that was lacking, that the project couldn't be completed, whereas we're using resource on something that isn't as necessary. One would suggest, or at least we need to know why. Thank you. So it's about the resource and being creative with using resource where it's most needed, rather than just blindly going through with projects and not seeing how it impacts on other ones. Thank you.
Is that cash resource or human resource?
Sorry, I meant resource. Engineers, project managers.
Okay, so staff capacity. I suppose I would just highlight there that, again, where funding is made available for a particular scheme, that funding will also cover the administration of that particular scheme in large part. It's not, I would certainly struggle as cabinet member for resources to see us allocating, revenue budget streams towards some of this more discretionary spending, which I think is the purpose of the, grant funding, and in this case, Section 106 is made available for this stuff. To ensure that it happens. Can I move on to the next question, Councillor Bond, about Mon Life? Is that okay?
Yes, go on then.
Yeah,
I don't think you're going to answer.
Sorry, perhaps we can follow this up later if you'd like to go into more depth.
It's really just about. It's really just about: are we being creative and looking holistically at what the council, the local authority need to deliver, and making sure that we're utilising what resource we do have, as in staff, as effectively as possible. That's it. Thank you.
To answer that question briefly, yes, we are. We work incredibly difficult to make sure that our resources are being utilised effectively to deliver the services which our residents value. Your third question about Mon Life performance, I just echo your statement that Mon Life is performing very well. I'd agree with that. My thanks go out to all of the staff in our Mon Life team. They do a really good job. They have consistently outperformed our expectations. So it's something that we're very proud of. We've got, as you'd expect, membership data across all of our centres. You're right to mention that Caldicott has got the lowest membership of our centres, but it's probably, I think your point where you're going with this is that the offers across our leisure centres differ, and therefore you're more likely to get higher membership in those centres with a better offering. I know it's not my local leisure centre, but I do sometimes travel to Monmouth Leisure Centre because it's got some particularly good facilities. It's obviously an ambition to make sure that we can have the best leisure facilities across the county, but it's also probably worth highlighting that the geographical nature of some of our centres in terms of how they're spaced out. We've kind of got Abergavenny and Monmouth in the top two corners, and then Caldicott and Chepstow probably closer to one another than other leisure centres, so maybe there's a potential bleed across between those two where people might choose to use one centre rather than the other. But that said, if you're a member of Mon Life, you can use any leisure centre. So it's a really good value thing, I think, becoming a member of Mon Life. And I think it's probably quite an in-depth conversation when we look at the strategy across our leisure centres. So, if maybe we could provide a written response to you with a little bit more information about the membership across the different centres and how that pans out in the facilities at different centres. Would that be acceptable to you, Councillor Bond?
Thank you. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
I think it'd be really helpful, Councillor Callagher. I'm sure people would be interested more broadly. Did you want to just address that final point about Newport Leisure Park, Castlegate that Councillor Bond's asked in terms of are we being perpetually overly optimistic, or are there reasons why we still find it difficulty in filling the voids that are there?
Are we being optimistic? I'm not sure. We've seen across a commercial estate at the minute, the demand can fluctuate. We've had a number of lettings going into our leisure parks. I think Newport Leisure Park is probably doing okay, in terms of its performance. It's covering its costs and providing the authority with an income, which, in these times, we're certainly grateful for the additional income. Castlegate is, as we know, it's a challenging asset to manage. It's a large site. It has significant overheads. We are continuing to develop the site into, some smaller office space, which is being successful. We are seeing increased occupancy there. And again, I think this also talks to a wider strategy, around Monmouthshire about the authority's role, and I speak specifically towards Castlegate, with having that ability to have a foot in that commercial market, so we can influence and support our local economy, and we can provide space for growing businesses, and we can be flexible with that space. So it does have, policy objectives away from just revenue raising, specifically Castlegate. But yeah, I think it's a very valid point, and I would like, to be honest, he's not here today, but to refer to Nick Keys, our head of landlord services, because I know he's got very good data on this. But if I believe at the last performance and overview committee, correct me if I'm wrong, Chair, but Nick Keys came and gave an update on our investment portfolio, and that practice will continue of Nick coming to this committee to provide updates on our investment portfolio.
Yeah, he absolutely did. Councillor Bond, quickly, I've allowed you several...
Yes, I'm so sorry, but how is it... I don't understand, sorry, I might be not understanding is my own fault. How can we have a 112k overspend and a 29k overspend and they be holding their own? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I think it's worth framing that against, it's about our expected income. So it's not an overspend, it's just a shortfall in the income that we expected. So, we say, just to pick numbers out of the sky, we forecast an income of £1 million, but that ends up being £950,000. It will show up on our in-year budget as a negative £50,000. So, it's not that it's a negative on our balance sheet. It's just falling a little bit short of our expectations.
So maybe over optimism. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And just looking at who's next, I'm going to call Councillor Garrett. I think, Councillor Pavia, you raised your hand on the screen after Councillor Garrett, and so I'll ask Councillor Pavia before Councillor Strong. But first of all, Councillor Garrett, please.
Thank you, Councillor Callard and Councillor Chandler, and also Jonathan and your team for all the hard work that you're doing behind the scenes in trying to resolve this situation. There's obviously national picture to this as well, which the chair has alluded to, and I think it's important, that we keep that in mind as well. We're probably slightly better off than a lot of councils in the UK at the moment. My 3 points relate firstly to schools. As a former teacher, I know that fixed costs of salary and pensions are a big issue that is going to be impossible for Monmouthshire to resolve because they're at a national level. But what are we doing about the supply teaching costs? I know there's the National Supply Pool for Wales. Are we encouraging our heads to look at the most cost-effective ways of getting supply teaching into schools to reduce those costs? The second one is around the increase in domiciliary care of £500,000, is that as a result of improvements in the health board reducing bed blocking? And if so, is there a risk that could become a further risk to us down the line if more patients are being admitted back into the community? And are we able then to perhaps get more funding from Welsh Government if the health boards are paying less in costs of keeping people? Can we get some funding from the health board to help mitigate some of those extra pressures that we're facing? And with the children's placements, with the news that some of those placements have broken down, what are we doing in terms of reviewing why those breakdowns have happened? Are there any common factors, any things that we could look to the future maybe to avoid and mitigate against those happening in the future? Okay, so it's mainly schools. How can we mitigate supply teaching costs? With the social care costs, are we able to maybe seek some extra funding from Welsh Government if there's going to be further risk to us going forward? And children placements, can we look at how those might be reviewed in terms of future cost increases and how we might mitigate against that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garrett. You probably only need to ask the question once, but we got it the first time around. But thank you anyway. So starting then with the first of those, who's going to pick up? Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Garrett, for the questions. I think you're really right to highlight supply teaching costs. It is a volatile area of school spending, and it does impact their budgets. It's something that we've got a big focus on, and our auditor, Jan, is doing a piece of work on this at the moment, so we hope that'll shed some further light on how we can, help support schools in bearing those costs or tackling those costs. But you're right to highlight it because it is a big cost pressure on the schools. Your next question about increases in domiciliary care. We have seen increased demand for the care packages. It's been a 10% increase in externally commissioned packages of care, which, like you say, has come at an additional cost of £500,000. It's just one of those pressures that we're seeing in the adult social care services at the moment. Can the health board support us with the costs? I'll hand over to Councillor Chandler if that's okay. I think he certainly knows a lot more than I do about this area, so he'll probably be able to shed more light on this. Thank you.
I think Councillor Garrett's particular issue was around delayed transfer of care and whether that relates to the increase of in domiciliary care, and if there is a relationship that we're seeing changing between the two. I think that was specifically what Councillor Garrett raised.
Yeah, thanks for that. Sorry, I must admit, I thought Councillor Garrett was talking about the £100 domiciliary care cap, but maybe I got that wrong, so clarification on that.
He's shaking his head on that one.
He's shaking his head. No, okay, so I'll take your interpretation. Clearly there is a strong emphasis on supporting improved pathways of care to get people out of hospital into either back into their homes or back into residential care, and there's a lot of emphasis being brought upon that. Welsh Government has introduced the 50-day challenge of different measures that it wants health boards and local authorities to put into place to move things forward. Some of those are easier than others, and some of those have a financial impact. So, for example, wanting to do more 7-day working to enable more discharges of patients. That does have a cost. We are in discussions. I've had meetings with the Cabinet Secretary, Jeremy Miles, and around this, as have the leader and others. There are indications that there are going to be some in-year support for this, but at the moment it is very unclear, and I think we're all eagerly waiting the Welsh Government's budget report next week, which will give a lot of clarity on that, following on from the UK Government's budget last month, which did indicate that more money will be coming into social care, but how that's going to pan out for us is unclear.
Councillor Chandler, can I just refer to Councillor Garrett's question. So,
so
I think it was very much about, and correct me, Councillor Garrett, if you meant something different, but I understood it to be, has something changed in the way that the NHS deals with delayed transfer of care that has increased domiciliary care for the local authority in terms of the numbers of people that we've forecast to be coming out of hospital beds actually increasing? And is there something there that has changed? I thought that's what you were referring to, Councillor Garrett, and I see you nodding.
Okay, so well, in that, I mean, in terms of, that's what I was talking about. There is that emphasis, that 50-day challenge, which is about how do we get people out of hospital quicker, and so that's about how we as local authorities, us as Monmouth, should work with the Health Board and RM Bevan on that. So a lot of our work on that, it's the quicker we get people out of hospital, the more then we're having to spend on domiciliary care or residential care for adults that have come out of hospital. So every time somebody comes out of hospital, it's transferring the cost from the Health Board to the council. But the resources aren't being transferred. So if that was the question, no. It is effectively local authorities, in a very crude sense, are bearing the cost of saving the Health Board money. It's transferring the financial burden to local authorities from health. But that's a very crude way of putting it, because what we're all trying to work out is the best outcomes for people. So the best outcome for somebody that is in hospital, that is where their medical treatment is complete, where they're ready for discharge, is we don't want them staying in hospital. We want them back in either in their homes, in their community, or we want them in a long-term residential care placement. So in terms of outcomes for people, this is what we want to do. The problem is that doing that, and the more we do it and the quicker we do it, the more the financial burden falls upon us, even if that does achieve a saving in the Health Board. And we've made this point, and I've made this point very clearly to Jeremy Miles, the Cabinet Secretary, that we need to have a more system change approach with how funding goes, so that funding follows the person. And I think it's been heard, but there are no easy answers. But we are looking at pooled budgets within the Regional Partnership Board. Regional Partnership Board is where the 5 local authorities in Gwent, combined with the RM Bevan Health Board, work together with some pooled budgets and stuff like that. So we have one of our overspends, for example, is in the frailty budget, because that's a pooled budget where we're working with other local authorities in terms of a frailty scheme to try and improve people's resilience. People who are frail, how do they have more independence? How do we work with them, with occupational therapists, physical therapists, to promote their independence? And the demand on that is very high. So we have, at a regional level, that has overspent, which has required us as a contributor to that regional fund to put some more money in. So that is one of our areas where we've had to put in another 112,000. But back to Councillor Garrett's question, are we getting additional funding from the Welsh Government for this? Not directly, should I say.
I think the third question from Councillor Garrett related to children's placements.
Yes, sorry, and yes, about children's placements, yes. I mean, it's very sad when a placement breaks down. It can be for a number of different reasons. It may be because the needs of the child have changed because of increasing complexity of care. It may well be that the needs of the foster placement, whether it's an independent fostering agency placement or one of our own, is their circumstances have changed. They're unable to cope with that. So there are times when those placements have broken down, and clearly every case is reviewed. We're not talking about huge numbers of children here. We know every child that's in our care. It's just over 200. We have a relationship with them, so every child has its own social worker. Every foster parent of our own in-house foster parents has their own supervising social worker who is separate, a different person. And of course, residential placements have their own supervisory arrangements. So we do review every single one. We try and learn from that. We try and make sure that child or children are placed in the best possible placement for them. And I think the care that goes into planning the care and support for children is absolutely exemplary. It's just, Yeah, I mean, it is. It's just there's so much put into that, so much emotional energy as well as physical time and effort that's put into planning those placements is there. So I think you can be reassured on that one, Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. And Councillor Garrett, are you content with those responses? Sorry, Councillor Garrett, I see you're on mute, but
I was having trouble with my mouse there. Sorry, apologies, technical issue. Yeah, thank you for those answers, all of you. I think what's clear is that we are meeting our statutory obligations, and there are obviously enormous pressures going on. But I'm satisfied that we're doing all our best to mitigate those risks. I'd hope maybe, as well as meeting Jerry Myers, maybe we could get our 5 members of the Senate as well, 4 list members as well as our elected member to lobby on our behalf as well. That might be something we could also do, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett, and noted. I'm going to ask Councillor Pavia next, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I continue to be concerned around the issue of NHS continuing healthcare, and I know Councillor Carr had mentioned in his opening comments and is highlighted in the Directorate Health the retrenching around their own cost pressures, and we have been unable to make progress in successfully pursuing continuing healthcare costs. And I think for residents watching, NHS Continuing Care is a package of care and support arranged and funded by the NHS, where it's been assessed that a person's primary need is a health-based need. No, there is no doubt there's been a shift of responsibility from hospital inpatient services to social care and community services, and there's certainly delegated activities that care staff are undertaking now, which a decade ago would have been delivered by registered nurses. But I think in terms of what the Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act says, it is unlawful for local authorities to provide services which are the responsibility of the NHS. And in terms of case law, and just thinking the Pam Coughlin case, local authorities can only provide some nursing care if it's incidental or ancillary to the provision of accommodation. So I think my question is, how long are we going to allow the Health Board to back away from its fundamental responsibilities to deliver health-based care? And should we be considering legal action and a judicial review regarding the decision-making behind their activities? And while it is, Chair, an edifying to see public sector organisations take legal action against each other, I do think now that a line needs to be drawn in the sand, and I would appreciate and anticipate that probably within the region we wouldn't be alone as a local authority wanting to pursue this form and cause of action. And my second and final question, Chair, and I'm just thinking about the collaborations we undertake regionally, and the Cabinet Member for Social Care, Councillor Chandler, mentioned the Regional Partnership Board and the collaboration there. We are obviously collaborating with the public sector organisations on the Shared Resource Service. But just in terms of, and I'm just thinking of the quite momentous decision that Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen took in the summer to share one Chief Executive Officer. And I know that they're going looking at the potential benefits and challenges with those two authorities working more closely together. And Stephen Vickers, the Chief Executive, is a practicing social worker. He's steeped in social work professionalism. And I know they're looking to find ways to seek efficiencies, optimise resource, work at scale, and increase innovation and creativity. Are we reaching out to both Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen during this period, which I think they call the discovery phase, when they're looking at the opportunities and challenges for further collaboration? Have we had any discussions with Blaenau Gwent and Torfaen in relation to that work? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Who wants to pick those questions up? The first one relating to the obligations that the Health Board may have, that Councillor Pavia is questioning whether they're backing off from. And who wants to?
Yeah, maybe, Chair, if I come in on the continuing healthcare question. As Councillor Pavia said, and I share his concerns, it's if a person's primary care need is seen as health or medical, then they should be being funded by the Health Board as opposed to by the local authority. And, you know, we are talking about significant sums of money here, and we are in dispute with, we're in negotiation with dispute with the Health Board on a number of individual cases. The trouble is that it's not always completely black and white. The black and white cases are fairly straightforward, but it's the more marginal cases about where do you count as someone's primary need is medical as opposed to primary need is for personal care. There are ones where we are pushing quite hard on that. Have we reached the stage of thinking that we should be going for some kind of judicial review or legal measures? We haven't felt that at this stage, but I wouldn't rule it out, and I think it is something that would have to be considered. But we do know that, you know, because Anara and Bevan are, you know, themselves have suffering there's quite a significant budget deficit, which dwarfs ours by multiple times, is that they're doubling down actually on their spending as well. So it's making some of those negotiations difficult. What I would say, and I think, and this comes from, you know, maybe previous life of working for other organisations supporting people with care needs, is that it shouldn't make any difference. Our ambition should be it shouldn't make any difference to the person receiving care. You know, whoever's paying for it, they shouldn't have to sort of be part of that. We want to make sure that that's process is as smooth as possible, that people get care. So as you said, you know, we know that we're in times paying for care where we don't think we should be. But we're not going to sort of just hold our hands up and say nothing to do with us, Gov. It's the Health Board's job. We're still going to provide that care while behind the scenes we're negotiating who's that paying for that. And sometimes we're splitting the costs, and sometimes we're still in ongoing negotiation. But it's not a satisfactory situation, and you know, and I do share your concerns.
So, Councillor Chandler, you just said that you're not ruling it out. Therefore, you're actively prepared to take legal action against the Health Board.
No, I'm not saying that we're actively exploring it. I'm just saying it's not ruled out. You know, we haven't explored it and said no, we're not going to go down that path. I'm saying we're not actively exploring it, and I wouldn't rule it out as a path. But it's not something that we would do lightly, and it's not something that we would look to see as happening imminently. I think there are other avenues we would explore first before we go down that nuclear option. And
I didn't say explore. That was your word. I said prepare. So you're actually prepared to take legal action against the Health Board is by not ruling it out. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that I would use those words. No, I think there is a difference between saying I'm prepared to do it and not ruling it out. I think I'm saying, you know, simply that. I wouldn't rule it out. That doesn't mean to say that that's an option that I would want to go to. I think there's a lot more exploration that would need to be done on that first, and lots of avenues that we'd want to go down first before we got to the stage of actively looking to see are we prepared to take that course of action.
So the second question from Councillor Pavia was, are we reaching out to Blanagwent Tarvine in their discovery period around closer joint working?
I mean, I'll hand over to colleagues, but I would say that we, you know, apart from obviously in social care, you know, we work closely together, as you know, and as you referenced with the partnership board, with all of the agencies, and we share resources and we share ideas, and learning is something that continuously happens on that. I would say specifically with Blanagwent and Torvine that the Cabinet, Monmouthshire Cabinet, have been having regular meetings with the Cabinet of Torvine Borough Council and Blanagwent Borough Council to explore areas where we can collaborate more at a cabinet level. I can't answer for more at an officer level in terms of those higher level things, so I'll hand over to colleagues on that.
Yes, John or Councillor Callan?
Thanks, Chair. I think, Councillor Pavia, your point was probably more general rather than specifically looking at social services as a specific. So I think the short answer is obviously yes. We're always in regular dialogue with our neighbouring authorities and, you know, the wider region, and it would be remiss of us not to be actively discussing some of those options that they're looking at. I think what we have to be careful of is to assume that that's a panacea to some of the problems that we face as local authorities in Wales. There was a reason why local administration for a lot of our services was decided upon previously. So we have to remember the differences that we have across geography, across demographics within Monmouthshire, and the reasons that was split out and devolved originally. That being said, I think as time moves on and we look across options such as digital and the wider areas of technology that has moved on at pace over time, over the last 10 to 20 years, I think there are opportunities there for us to work on a collaborative footprint. So it's right and proper that we're involved in those conversations and to be there at the front end of those, because I think sometimes if I just think back to where things haven't quite worked out previously in terms of some of that collaboration, it's been where a partner has joined later on and they can't align themselves perhaps as quickly to some of the shape of what's been put forward. So I think the short answer is yes, we'd always want to have that option and to be involved in those discussions up front.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Councillor Pavia, were you content with those responses? Yeah. Thank you. And I'm going to move on to Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. Three, if I may. Since the issue of Castle Park Primary School has been raised, can I seek clarification on that? Because my understanding was that money has been allocated. We had quite a discussion in this chamber some time ago about the allocation of 106 money in the Sevenside area. But I gather what's happened is, in preparation for the structural work, other issues were found to have to be dealt with first. So it's not so much a problem of money, but a different issue altogether. I'm aware that Councillor Grocott, as Cabinet Member, was actually in Castle Park School only last week. He seems to be doing a tour of all Caldicott schools at the moment. So can I ask him if he could provide some clarification? Perhaps we can go to him, because my other two questions will go elsewhere.
That would be absolutely fine. Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to address this. Yeah, I've had meetings with the school, the head teacher and the chair of governors. The plans are being drawn up. They'll be drawn up by the end of December. I'll be meeting the school again in January to work out a timetable for completion of the programme. I think Councillor Strong is quite right. There asbestos panels were found in the school and they have had to be treated. But the project, I think, is back on schedule and we're looking for very clear timings as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. That's very, very helpful, very clear. Back to you, Councillor Strong.
Thank you. Yes, that's excellent. Right, two that will come, I think, in the direction of Councillor Chandler. One, I think, is an easy one to solve. Just a wording error on page 16 of your report, or 24 of 114, whichever system you're using. Bottom paragraph, second line, beginning of the sentence, halfway along the line, care at home placement. If you read the context of the paragraph, I think that should say care home placements. It's only a small word, but it's a very, very big difference. So perhaps you just want to take that back and get that corrected. Then on the next page, page 17, there's reference to the 2.3 million social care debt payments that haven't been recovered. Can you elaborate a little bit? I mean, how much, roughly, ballpark, do we feel is like to be recovered? Or how much of that is, the figure of 20,000 bad debt is mentioned. What are our processes for collecting that money as well? Do we have finance people who deal with that, or is that left to social workers at all, which I would hope not? And what can we do about ensuring that sort of debt doesn't accrue accrue so heavily in the future, because it's a big amount of money.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Strong. Yeah, I mean, yes, you're right about that typo, and we'll sort that out. And yeah, in terms of the non-payment of charges, then yeah, that's we've increased the bad debt provision by 20k because that's our assessment of that in terms of money that's owed to us, of which we don't think we're going to get back, but others will. But I might hand over, I think, to John here, who think I can give a little bit more detail about how that aspect of things work. But you're right, it's handled by finance and a team within social care, not by social care workers. It's separated out from that. But
okay, John.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just to elaborate, I guess, we do have members of the finance team who work closely, and just to be clear, the majority of this is in adult social care, and we work closely with families, representatives of the people receiving care, along with the people themselves, to make it clear up front the expectation around the payment that is expected. I think the most important thing is that the financial assessments are done up front and are in place and understood, and that's something we're working hard on right up front with the people receiving care and their representatives. We, of course, take advice from our legal teams where necessary, but we have to understand that some of the arrangements here are quite complex. I think if you think of perhaps some of the complexities in terms of, for instance, someone losing the capacity to act for themselves, and we have to go through a process then of dealing with representatives, and that's quite a long drawn-out process. And similarly, we'll have issues where perhaps a property is going through a probate process or such like that, really puts a big chunk into the collectability of this debt. So it's obviously becoming a significant focus for us. Whilst we have resource allocated to it, we're in discussions around that, and where we can make some immediate gains in terms of this, because I think you're right to highlight it as a risk for us. Clearly, it impacts on the authority's cash flow position and such like. So it's in our interests to ensure that this is dealt with appropriately.
Thank you. Councillor Strong, any feedback on that?
No, that's fine. I mean, you seem to say it's a sort of a reasonable figure that goes with a territory, and therefore the key thing to look at is whether that figure is going up or down, and make sure it isn't going up. Yeah, thank you.
It's really helpful to flag that up. Also, thanks for picking up the typo. It just proves that we really do read our reports at this committee, doesn't it? That's good to see. Just a small typo, if I may add to, we're in a little typo section here, but on the covering report, you might just want to have a look at it. It jumps from point 1 to 2, and 2 then is listed as 3.1, 3.2. If you have a look at that, John, I think you'll see it's just a simple change that needs to be updated. And on to Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you to the officers and cabinet members for for all the work in bringing this update. Just one question from me around the additional learning needs. 510,000 overspend, and I appreciate, in most circumstances, it is reacting to issues in this particular case, as it was mentioned earlier. But in particular, if you could provide some understanding of the 256,000 overspend on the new, is that unexpected starters going into independent schools, and any work that's being made to identify similar cases of children or young people earlier, or is it just simply that they're new to county? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. And who wants to pick that up?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Nikki, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so in terms of the additional needs overspend, yeah, the £510,000, it's pupils that we were expecting, so it's a range of things. Some of them we were expecting to leave school and have continued in their education, and the others are pupils that are being educated other than at school, so usually at home, where we have to put some bespoke packages around them to support them in their education. So there'll be packages, for example, working with Monlife to go to Gilwern, for example, and have a package of support around there. So obviously that costs the local authority to put those into place. And yes, in terms of the other overspend for the outer county schools, yes, that is new starters that have come into the county that we were not aware of at the time.
Thank you, Nikki. And Councillor Howells, you content with that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just, if I may, just before we move on to the next item. So one of the, I think, striking overall aspects of the report is, as Councillor Callard, you've mentioned, the significant deterioration since the last financial update of £964,000, adding to the projected overspend position at the end of the year. If we only look at the services overspend, it's been significantly offset yet again by Treasury management, which has pulled it back by another just shy of £800,000. And I suppose the way that one might realistically talk about that is that the true picture of the overspend within the services is not including the Treasury management. I think most residents and families would understand that you have to manage within your income. You can't draw on money coming in from whatever it might be, pulling money from changing your mortgage or something. So the actual forecast overspend for the services is running over £5 million. So that is what we're looking at as we now are in the second half of the year, an overspend of somewhere of the region of £4 to £4.5 to £5 million overspend. And the report yet again very specifically states, and I quote, that the final budget at 4.6 in the report, it says the final budget for 24-25 does not include any use of reserves to meet recurrent expenditure. And that is something that has been said many times in the last few financial updates. So it leads to the pretty obvious question that here we are now in the second half of the year, and we're looking at a very significant increase in the overspend. And we have set ourselves, or you have set yourself, the rule that there would be no use of reserves to meet any recurrent expenditure. So how would we deal with what you're now forecasting to be a very significant overspend that is rising? Does it simply require external support? Because how else are you going to be able to manage your way through this into the next year? I don't know if Councillor Callard, you wanted to come back on that. John?
Thank you. I'll come in first if it's okay, Chair. Thank you for the question. I think the premise of the overspend in the services being offset against outperformance in other services, I know we've discussed this in the past, but I think that's actually a good outcome for the authority, in that where we're performing well, it's actually subsidising our statutory services that we provide. You mentioned about gains in Treasury and how a family who was up against it couldn't just change their mortgage. Well, if a family was up against it, I would absolutely encourage them to renegotiate their mortgage. It's effective budget management, and I don't think it's a criticism of this authority that we, employ these tools in order that we can protect our services. It might not be something that we can do forever. These tools that we can use are often, short-term gains, but when we're in the situation that we are in, which we find ourselves in right now with regards to financial pressure, then, I think we should absolutely take them. And I think our residents should expect us to take them in order to protect the services that they rely on. The further question about the use of reserves and our overspend, you're correct to say that in our budget for this year we had no recourse to revenue reserves. It's a position I would hope that we can hold. The overspend has increased by just under £1 million from month 3 to month 6. I don't expect it to increase any further towards the end of the year. In fact, I expect the opposite. I mentioned in my introduction that it may be that we have an in-year injection of funding as a result of the government's budget set in October. That would be very welcome if there was any additional income forthcoming there in order to protect the services. And as I also mentioned in my introduction, that we are continuing to develop and pursue in-year budget recovery, which has the potential of, arresting that overspend by an additional £1 million to bring it in. But I do think the point you make is very valid, that if we do get to year end with an overspend, then it comes off the bottom line, doesn't it? It comes from our reserves. And while that's a situation we're all working very hard to avoid, that is the, that's where you get to in the end if you're unsuccessful in those efforts.
Yeah, and it's I think a very honest and frank assessment of that. I appreciate it, and I suppose the concomitant of it is that that would affect our financial resilience, and our auditors would have something to say about that. Are we in direct discussion with our auditors about what appears right now to be, we're very much heading in that path? And I think you've made it very clear that the only alternative is external financial support that we have no means of controlling. So is that something that you're concerned about, that the auditors would express real concern that the financial resilience would be affected if we have to draw £5 million out of reserves, or whatever the number turns out to be at the end of the year?
I think regards our audit opinion, we have been audited by the Wales Audit Office on our our financial sustainability. I believe the verdict was reasonably positive, if I'm right in saying that, John.
Thanks, Councillor. So I think the clear outcome of that audit was that a similar opinion across Wales, I should add, is that there needed to be a clear path towards financial sustainability, acknowledging the level of budget gap over the medium term. And our medium-term financial strategy was the outcome of that opinion, and that is what is going to look to shape and develop that over time. We've already touched upon the programme of change, which is a part of that, and I think, Jay, you're right to mention, in the round, all of this will be important, whether that's additional external funding, whether it's change to service delivery, the preventative measures that we've talked to. So ultimately, should we have a bottom line deficit at the end of the year, it will need to come from reserves. It will reduce that financial resilience. But I think the last point from me is that a local authority budget is complex. It will always change day by day, and it's right that we flex and pivot within that. So, the point around Treasury management gains, I think that the public would expect us to make best use of our cash funds whilst they sit there ready to go out to support service delivery. We sit on £180 million of borrowing. It's right and proper that we make best practice and reduce the cost of that where possible. And the gains that we see from that goes towards supporting service delivery. So the flexibility is hugely important. We talked to it in the covering report around the range of measures that we're looking at around flexibility in grants, etc. So there's no one answer to this, either in year or for the medium term. So hopefully, Chair, that gives some context to the answer.
Yes, thank you, John. And none of this is easy. I continue to acknowledge that. I suppose our residents may well see Treasury management coming to a degree of the rescue of the overspend in the services as the equivalent of money down the back of the sofa, and they might just wonder, when are we going to run out of sofas? So I hope we don't. But there's only so much that you can actually pull out of Treasury management. I think you've acknowledged that, and that is really the heart of the question, where that would leave us. But okay, thank you for those responses and for the questions. We're going to move on now to, first of all, I'll move the report and the contents of the report and the recommendations that are shown within it. Thank you to all of you for the responses and the questions that have been raised, and we'll move on to the final report, which is a brief update on the secondary schools leadership funding. And I think we've got Councillor Grucott and Nikki Wellington coming up front in that soft shoe shuffle that we're extremely good at. Thank you, Ben. We'll move straight into the final report, which is on leadership funding review, and over to, I don't know, Councillor Grockett, did you want to introduce the report, and then over to Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. This is the first such review for many years now, and I think it is necessary. But for a bit of clarity, it's not about the leadership pay of head teachers, it's about the actual exercise of running a school and the funding of the leadership element in a school. So it covers our 3 comprehensive schools and the brand new 3 to 19 school, and so just in itself I think it's useful because it puts that brand new concept, the first that we've had of that type of school, into its context in leadership costs. The report has already been discussed at our school budget forum, and there it has been discussed by head teachers, school finance managers, our own finance experts, and indeed, Chair, by politicians, as both of us are members of that forum. It was debated and discussed in a very rational, calm manner, and agreement that is represented in the report that you've got now. So just to reassure members of committee, this does represent the views of those professional members of the school budget forum. It relates only to the secondary school element. Primary head teachers are also in the forum, but felt that they did not need their funding element to be reviewed, and so stood aside. So just as a point of explanation. In terms of the outcomes of the report, which you're about to comment on, of our 4 schools that are affected by the review, 3 of them will benefit in financial terms, 1 will lose. But the school that will lose, the head teacher was part of the committee that put the report together and is supportive of it, and there will be a 2-year buffer in that school, so they get the opportunity to slowly slide into slightly reduced means. So having said that, I'd like to hand over to Nikki Wellington, who has led on the finance element here and is far better at the figures than I am.
It's probably just worth, just adding that the consultees include the governing bodies as well as the head teachers, I think, Nikki, yes. which is helpful to know. But over to you, and thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think you covered most of the report, and obviously that's there for you to see. I think the working group were very clear about some aspects. They wanted it based on size of school, somehow that the size of school was representative, which obviously with pupil numbers that would be, and also it was important for the 3 to 19 schools that there were phases recognised. So obviously we have put in additional leadership funding for the primary phase of the school. So they were the two sort of areas that they wanted to be to look at. We did look at a range of opportunities, but this was their preferred option in funding. So for today is to take your comments to feed into the consultation, along with comments from all of those consultees that are listed in the document.
Thank you, Nikki. And I've got Councillor Bond.
Thank you very much. Yes, it makes a lot of sense, this. I just wonder, because obviously for reference, how does the King Henry VIII primary phase budget relate to other primaries in Monmouthshire? I guess they're all equivalent because all the others were equivalent, and I guess there's no gain then in there's no saving in having it all in the one school, so therefore less need for additional leaders, I guess. So that's what this is telling us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. So yes, in terms of the funding element, then obviously that is equivalent to the other primaries. The same size primary would be, except that would get this similar kind of funding. In terms of the actual structure of the how the head obviously puts his leadership team in place, that will be up to him and the governing body. So this is just as Martin, as Councillor Greycott has said before, it's around the funding, not the pay element of this.
There's no saving then, as I said. No.
So it's for the school to have a look at the structure and to work out whether there are any savings for it. The funding that we're putting in is, as I said, is equivalent for a primary and a secondary. There will be savings because you wouldn't, for example, have 2 head teachers.
Of course, that's what my question. Thank you.
That's really helpful. It sounds like a really good question from the point of view of residents. I'm sure they'd be interested to know, because that's part of the rationale and the benefits sit there, which is but it's for the school very much to come forward with the plan, and that sounds very good. Okay, I'm going to ask Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report, which makes extremely interesting reading. There are a few concerns I have. First would be, what measures will be put in place that reductions in leadership resources, to ensure that reductions in leadership resources at Chepstow School do not disproportionately impact vulnerable groups, including pupils with disabilities or those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And sort of regarding sort of monitoring and accountability, how will you monitor the long-term impact of these changes on educational outcomes across all 4 schools, especially in Chepstow, where funding is, as you've said, significantly reduced? And with the changes proposed, how do you, as an administration, plan to address the potential risk of leadership burnout due to increased workload, particularly in schools with decreased funding? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And Nikki, did you want to pick those up? Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of your first question around Chepstow and obviously the impact on vulnerable groups and disadvantaged learners within Chepstow, I think to be very clear, I think this is why we have put the transitional funding in, so that what we won't see is the drop in funding immediately. There'll be a staged process into that. Also, Councillor Grocott will be aware that we've recently had a meeting with Chepstow School, and they are looking at ways that they can support their learners, but in a more cost-effective way. They are our smallest school, and at the moment they have the largest leadership group across our 4 secondary schools. So they are looking at that to see where they can go. But I think it's important around this transition funding that they've got for the next two years to put them into the place where their funding will be reduced. Okay with that one. So the second one around the monitoring and the monitoring of education outcomes. Obviously, we work closely as a directorate. So obviously, I'll be working very hard looking at the financial aspects of how this funding has worked and how the changes in the funding has worked. But also, we will then layer on top all the educational aspects through our directorate, who will through our school improvement team within the directorate. So it will be monitored in that way. We, as colleagues, we will talk to each other and we will understand the impact of any funding and if there is any reduction in terms of the standards within the school. And how to address leadership burnout. Yeah, the leadership burnout. Again, I think it's something that we do talk about frequently in terms of a director, and I don't think it's in terms of leadership burnout I don't see this as will have a direct impact on leadership burnout. As I said, it's for the schools to structure their leadership teams. 3 of our 4 schools will be actually seeing an increase in funding. It is Chepstow that will see a reduction in funding. But I think, it is, again, we talk about it quite intensively with our employee services, and we understand that. We have sickness stats that come through regularly. So I don't think this will have a direct impact on it, but it will be something that obviously we will continue to monitor through with our HR colleagues. Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Buckler, are you content?
Yes, thank you, Nikki. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. I see Councillor Strong's just raised his hand.
Just ever so quickly, I think the issue of burnout is for another day rather than here. But just to add that burnout isn't confined to leadership; it applies to classroom teachers very much indeed as well. Thank you.
If we stretch into social care, and there's a whole realm of that we recognise, and we can never say it too often. We massively appreciate the efforts of every single person working in our schools and in social care to keep all our services there right where they need to be. So thank you. So that's the end of the questions. Thank you for those, and thanks very much also Nikki and Councillor Grocott for spending actually the meeting waiting, but it hopefully has been a useful meeting as well, because you contributed during the meeting in earlier phases, so thank you for that. And we're going to move directly on to the last item, which is really just to say that next meeting, can you believe it is in 2025? Who would have believed? What happened to 2024? Do you remember January? For goodness sake, it was only yesterday, wasn't it? In any case, also to wish everyone on the committee and all the officers a very happy Christmas. I think we're allowed to say that now. We're into December, and hope you get what you're looking for Christmas, under the Christmas tree, whatever that might be. It'll probably be like a bit of extra budget we'll all be looking for. But let's keep optimistic. Okay, I declare the meeting finished. Thank you.